On today's mailbag, I'll explain why I believe Riley Leonard has a chance to cement his legacy at Notre Dame if he's able to lead the Irish on a deep playoff run, plus some playoff scenarios that I think would be perfect for Notre Dame. That's next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and it is great to have you here on Friday, November 15th. So, happy Friday to you, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. I'd really appreciate it if you took a quick second to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, really excited for today's mailbag. I always enjoy seeing what's on your mind, and I got some great questions this week. A lot of them were about Riley Leonard. I think it's because I called him a good quarterback. I know, crazy to say. There's also a lot of questions about the playoffs, which is to be expected this time of year, so we're certainly going to dive into all of that. Plus, I got some thoughts on Jaylen Sneed, Xavier Watts, and who Marcus Freeman would pick between a pair of top targets on Notre Dame's recruiting board. So we have a lot to get into today. Let's get into the questions. The first one comes from @ND Today, who has a two-part question. Do you think the NIU loss permanently damaged Riley Leonard's legacy at Notre Dame? Does a playoff win reverse the damage and change the way fans will remember him? I think it depends on who you ask, to be honest. Because for me, no, it did not permanently ruin Riley Leonard's legacy because Notre Dame is still in the playoff hunt and they still could technically win the national championship. But I think it definitely did ruin the legacy for a lot of fans out there. And I see those fans a lot in my comments. We're going to talk a lot about Riley Leonard to start the show today because I have some thoughts on him. If Riley Leonard ends up winning a national championship, I would hope that most fans would embrace him. But the way that some fans talk about Riley Leonard, I'm honestly not sure that even a national championship could get some detractors, some haters, let's say, to change their opinion of Riley Leonard. Because I think that if Notre Dame were to win it with Riley, they would just think that Steve Angeli could have done it, and they probably would give no credit to Riley Leonard. I'm not talking to the majority of people, but I do think that there is a minority of Notre Dame fans who hate Riley Leonard so much because he was a transfer or the loss to NIU that they simply will never get over it, and that in their mind, his legacy at Notre Dame is permanently ruined. And honestly, for most of those people, it was probably ruined before it even started because he's a transfer. And there are a lot of Notre Dame fans who are sick of Notre Dame taking transfer quarterbacks. Personally, I think if Notre Dame makes it to the Final Four, Riley Leonard is going to be a huge reason why. They can't get there on their defense alone. They're going to have to score. They're going to have to be explosive on offense. And up to this point, Riley Leonard has been one of their most dynamic weapons on the offense. I think overall, Jeremiah Love is the best player. But what Riley Leonard has done, and especially ever since that game against Miami, Ohio, when he's gotten better as a passer, he has continued to get better on the ground using his legs. That continues to be an asset for this Notre Dame offense. And I think that he's gotten better at getting the ball to his playmakers in space. I think the chemistry between him and the offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, has really improved, and that Denbrock's scheme is catered to what Riley Leonard does best and what the weapons on the outside do best. Like we're starting to see Jane Greathouse get a lot more tunnel screens. That seems to be working. Like, I guess it's not really that surprising that Mike Denbrock, who's only been around this version of the Notre Dame team for less than a year, like it took him a little while to get everyone on the same page, but now things are really clicking, and they're doing it against bad opponents, so we're going to see what it looks like going up against a real defense, and I think that USC game in a few weeks is going to be a big test, and hell, even Army is going to be a big test, because even though Army hasn't really played that many good teams this season, they do have statistically one of the best defenses in the entire country. So they are going to stress this Notre Dame offense to some degree, right? Like Notre Dame definitely has more talent on their offense compared to Army's defense, and they definitely are bigger and faster. But as we know, sometimes that doesn't necessarily lead to a win. We don't have to look back too far to remember a time when Notre Dame lost to a team that they were significantly more talented than back in September. But I think as Riley Leonard continues to improve, the offense continues to improve with him. So if he leads the Irish to a deep playoff run, that is going to be a really, really great thing for him and also this Notre Dame team, right? Because they're going to lean on him heavily to get them there. They've leaned on him a lot this season both with his legs and a little bit more with his arm as of late. And I think if he gets the Irish to the playoff and then he wins 2 games there, like that would be a really big accomplishment because Notre Dame has made it to the playoff twice. Both appearances were led by Ian Book. Unfortunately, Book was not able to win one of those games. Granted, it's not really all his fault, right? Because he went up against 2 juggernauts in 2018 Clemson and 2020 Alabama, 2 eventual national champions. But in order to get to the Final Four, they're going to have to win 2 games, and those could be 2 very tough matchups. So if Notre Dame gets on the big stage, wins not only 1 game, but another playoff game as well to put themselves right in there in the top 4 teams of the country, Riley Leonard is going to be a big reason why, and I think if that happens, fans will actually embrace him. Not all of them, but I think the rational majority will, and that would be great because then Notre Dame could sell that to recruiting, even though he wasn't a homegrown kid. Still, the fact that they had a really dynamic playmaker at quarterback get them to the Final Four of the playoff, especially one like Riley Leonard who has embraced Notre Dame and has done everything right publicly, especially since that loss to NIU. I think that it would go a really long way for the Irish this season and in the future. Next question, another one about Riley Leonard. Connor Cross 17. Do you think Riley Leonard has been a better quarterback than Sam Hartman was at Notre Dame, record aside? So, yeah, record aside, that's a good caveat because I could easily point to the fact that Notre Dame is still in it in mid-November. Last year, Notre Dame was certainly out of it at this point. A big reason why is because Sam Hartman had an utter collapse against Louisville and Clemson. Like, I don't know what happened to him in those games. It was like watching a completely different player. And Riley Leonard really showed up, especially in the biggest moments this season, like that final drive against Texas A&M. And even though he wasn't able to capitalize in the second half of NIU, I think that's more so because he was hurt, but he has gotten a lot better. And statistically, Riley Leonard's numbers are, I think, going to end up being better than Sam Hartman. So these are Leonard's numbers through 9 games. 64% completion percentage, over 2,000 total yards, 2,184 total yards to be exact. That's combined passing and rushing. He is the team's leading rusher, even with a stable of loaded running backs. He has 22 total touchdowns, 9 passing, 13 rushing, but hey, those rushing touchdowns count too. And he only has 4 turnovers this season, 3 picks and that fumble against Miami. Sam Hartman in 2023 was a 63.5. He had a 63.5 completion percentage, 2,689 pass yards, 24 passing touchdowns to 8 picks. He also added 123 rushing yards, which is honestly more than I thought he had, and 3 touchdowns on the ground. So he had 27 total touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and around 2,900 total yards. I think Riley Leonard is going to clear every single one of those numbers, and he's going to have less turnovers. So not only do I think Riley Leonard is going to have a better season statistically, not just passing when you add all of it up, of course. Also, I think he's going to end up having a much better record, and I think that he's going to have a chance to lead Notre Dame in the college football playoff, which is not something that Sam Hartman did. But I think the team around Riley Leonard this year is better than the one last year, specifically on offense. Hartman had a better offensive line, but even though Hartman had Audric Esme, that receiver room was a big problem. And even though it took a little bit for this wide receiver room to get rolling, Sam Hartman didn't have a Bo Collins, and he was dealing with a really depleted receiving core throughout much of the year because they were dealing with a bunch of injuries. So far this season, Notre Dame hasn't had as many injuries to the receiver room. Like Jordan Faison has been in and out of the lineup, but for the most part, they have been able to stay healthy. So I think that Riley Leonard is a little bit more weapons at his disposal, but overall, I think Riley Leonard has had a better season statistically and in the way that he has led this team through this point in the season, but he's still got 3 games left to go, and there's a lot more football left to be played, so I really do not want to count my chickens before they hatch here. But considering it is November and Notre Dame is in the playoff race, we do have to talk about the playoffs. And honestly, once Notre Dame lost Northern Illinois, it felt like making the playoff would be a long shot. Now they might have a chance to host, but is there any way they could reach the 5 seed? I'm going to break it down right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. That's right, we have a new sponsor here at Locked On Irish, and nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off OMAHAsteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, let's talk about the college football playoffs. And Jude Smith, 59, asks, is there any way that Notre Dame could get the 5 seed? It's crazy that we're even in this position, right? Because throughout the offseason, I said that Notre Dame really needed to get the 5 seed if they wanted to have a chance at making a deep playoff run, because if you get the 5 seed, you're more likely than not playing the Group of 5 champ in the 5-12 matchup to start. And then if you get by them, you have a more favorable matchup in the second round, most likely going up against the 4 seed. So now they're actually in position to do it. I would say it's a long shot, but it's not impossible. So they would have to win out, obviously. And I think Oregon and Texas would have to win out as well, and they would lock up the 1 and 2 seeds respectively. That's chalk, right? Because Oregon is ranked number 1 right now, and even though Ohio State is ranked number 2, Texas is right behind them at number 3. So theoretically, Oregon would beat Ohio State again in this plan. Or things could get weird with Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana in the Big Ten. Because if Ohio State were to beat Indiana, I think that would set Indiana back behind Notre Dame permanently, right? There's nothing else they could do to jump Notre Dame. Then, if Ohio State got beat badly by Oregon in the championship game, maybe Notre Dame would jump them. Ohio State would have 2 losses. Now, granted, both would be the same team, and we don't know how the committee is going to penalize teams for losing in the conference championship games. If it's resounding, maybe that'll sting a little bit more and they'll be more willing to move them back. I honestly don't see that happening with Ohio State. I think they're too talented. But you also have Penn State. Penn State goes on the road to Purdue, which they'll win because Purdue is one of the worst teams in college football. But then Penn State plays at Minnesota. That could be tricky. USC lost a close game at Minnesota earlier this year. USC was in a very close game with Penn State, so it's not crazy to think that Penn State could trip up and potentially lose on the road at Minnesota in the middle of November when it could be really cold up there. Maybe the elements get in the way and somehow Penn State gets upset by the Golden Gophers. Then Penn State is at home against Maryland to close out the season. I don't think they're losing that game, but it's not crazy to think that Penn State could lose one more game this season. If they lose another, that's 2 losses. They would be behind Notre Dame. Notre Dame would move up another spot. But what if Ohio State beats Indiana, and then they lose to Michigan again? First of all, they might fire Ryan Day on the spot. I don't even know if he would make it off the field. It might be like a Lane Kiffin tarmac situation if Ohio State were to lose to Michigan again, especially when you consider how much money is invested into this Ohio State team, how bad Michigan has looked all season long. I don't think it's going to happen, but at this point, you can't rule anything out. And if that were to happen, it would also have implications for the playoff because then Ohio State would have 2 losses. They wouldn't be eliminated, but then making the conference championship would be a little bit tricky, and then they could be behind Notre Dame. So let's say Penn State wins out, Ohio State beats Indiana, they lose to Michigan, then it's Oregon and Penn State in the conference championship game. Well, what if Oregon crushes Penn State in that game? Would they move behind Notre Dame? Again, they'd have 2 losses, but that second loss came in a conference championship. We don't know what the committee would do, but I think that they would be more willing to put Penn State behind Notre Dame if their second loss happened in the conference championship than a team like Ohio State. So that's a possibility. BYU could lose in the regular season, or they could lose to Colorado in the Big 12 champ. Then I think they would fall to like the 8 or 9 seed, but then Boise State and SMU would get the automatic bids. Colorado would get an automatic bid of the playoff, and then it would just be a matter of who's ranked higher, Boise State or Colorado in this case, if they were to win the Big 12 championship. So I know I'm throwing a bunch of different stuff at you, so let's try to break it down and keep it simple here. Notre Dame could get the 5. I think if Oregon and Texas win out, they take up 1 and 2. If Penn State loses again, Ohio State beats Indiana, and then they lose again, and then BYU loses. I think Notre Dame would vault all the way up to the 5 seed because there'd be a bunch of 2-loss teams at that point, and the 1-loss teams, I think they would be ahead of all of them. Also, what I haven't mentioned here, Tennessee, Georgia. Tennessee would also have to lose to Georgia this weekend, which is a very possible scenario because they are without Nico, or they might be without Nico Iamaleava. I shouldn't say they will be because there's all kinds of conflicting reports out there. I don't think anyone outside of the Tennessee coaching staff and the team knows whether or not he's actually going to be able to go this weekend because Tennessee right now is ranked 1 spot ahead of Notre Dame, but we will see what happens. Georgia is big favorites in this game. And that actually leads me to my next question here from @J_Patterson3. If Notre Dame wins out, will they host a playoff game? If Georgia beats Tennessee or Ohio State beats Indiana, I think it's likely that Notre Dame will host a playoff game because they would probably get the 8 seed in that scenario. But what if Tennessee wins? What if they somehow beat Georgia? Georgia would be eliminated. That'd be their third loss. And now Tennessee is right up there with 1 loss, and they would be ahead of Notre Dame, and I think they'd probably stay there the rest of the way. Or what if Indiana beats Ohio State? That's when things could get weird, right? And Notre Dame could be in a situation where they still make the playoff if they win out, but they aren't hosting a game. If BYU loses, that would certainly help Notre Dame's cause as well. But this is where it can get kind of tricky, because even if Notre Dame gets a playoff game, they get to host it. Like, what if they get the 6th seed and they have to play a team like Georgia? That wouldn't really be a whole lot of fun. Not saying they couldn't win that game, because Georgia hasn't looked like their typical self this year, and a big reason why is because that offense has been anemic. But, I don't want to watch this Notre Dame offensive line go up against Georgia's defensive line, and I know that they held their own against Texas A&M at the start of the year, but I just look at Georgia's defensive front, and they just are different, man. Those are some bad dudes on that defensive line. I think that they would cause a lot of problems for Notre Dame on the offensive side of the ball. So there's no guarantee that if Notre Dame wins out, they will host a playoff game. They're going to need some help, but it's a lot more possible than it was just a few weeks ago. All right, one more question on the playoffs here. This one comes from my guy, Dimwitland, one of my favorite YouTube commenters, always has some really interesting thoughts down there. He asks, if the Irish take care of business but don't host a playoff game and you have to pay for the trip and tickets, is there any potential away game that you would not go see Notre Dame at? Part 2, if you were in Marcus Freeman's shoes and had to choose, would you rather get 4-star linebacker Man Framo or high 4-star wide receiver Derek Meadows? Let's get to the recruiting question in a second, because that is a very, very good question. But here's where I'm not going. I'm not going to SMU, not going to Boise State. Don't think I'm going to IU, and I'm certainly not going to Miami for a playoff game. I just have no real interest in going to SMU. Don't have any interest in going to Boise State. I mean, seeing the blue turf would be cool, but really not that big of a deal. IU, if I'm going back to Indiana, I'm going to Notre Dame. That's really the only reason why I would go back to that. Say no disrespect to the people who live in Indiana now, but I just don't really think I want to go to Bloomington. I've been there before a couple times, visited some friends in college there. Ton of fun. Bloomington, elite college town. I actually, now that I think about it, I went to the first half of an IU Michigan game there and was all Michigan fans. So the idea of going to a playoff game there is honestly kind of breaking my brain a little bit here. But I don't know if I would be willing to spend all that money to go to Bloomington. There probably wouldn't be that many places to stay, so I'm going to have to pass on that. Miami, it's been a house of horrors for Notre Dame. I don't want to go back there, and I don't think that would even happen. I don't think there's a scenario where Miami could then jump Notre Dame. So that is probably it. BYU would kind of be up in the air. I think going to Provo could be cool. I mean, the scene is awesome, but do I really want to spend the weekend before Christmas in Provo? Probably not. But if Notre Dame travels to Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, I would love to go to those places. I don't know if I would be willing to pay for the ticket and the trip for all of them, but if it's at Oregon, I mean, that's super convenient for me because I live in Southern California. That's pretty easy to get to. I actually was in Oregon for something I was doing at Fox this past summer. Gorgeous campus. Walked around outside Autzen Stadium. Unbelievable. Alabama, I'm there. Tennessee, I'm there. Ole Miss, I'm there. Texas, I'm there. Ohio State might not be there, but maybe. Notre Dame has been there a few times, so that doesn't really have as much of I mean, it'd still be awesome, right, to be able to go to Ohio State and watch Notre Dame play a playoff game there, but very hostile environment, that's for sure. As for the recruiting question, if I had to pick between Man Framo or Derek Meadows, this is such a tough question, Dimwitland, and I'm honestly mad at you for asking me because it's so good. I think he has to take Derek Meadows because Notre Dame is just so thin at wide receiver, and even though they had Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert as true freshmen, they just don't have anyone in the room who is as big and as fast as Derek Meadows. And sure, there's concerns. I voiced them about his drops, the fact that he didn't produce that much his senior year at Bishop Gorman. I don't love this pick because I think Man Framo is such a sure thing, but I look at Notre Dame's linebacker room, and they've got Kingston Viliamu-Muasu, who's a true freshman, Jane Osbury, who's a redshirt freshman, Drake Bowen, who's a sophomore. They are pretty set with young linebackers. So it's not as much of a need, even though I think Madden Framo is going to be a stud in college. I just think that you have to take the risk with Derek Meadows if you're Notre Dame to make up for the recruiting misses at wide receiver in this cycle and in previous cycles. So tough decision, but great question, didn't land. I appreciate it. All right, coming up next, considering how well Jaylen Sneed has been playing as of late, would a position change be in his best interest and the team's? It might be able to work, and I'll explain why right after this. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. All right, my pick this week, I'm not going to lie. I hate it. I do. Because I'm taking the Chicago Bears plus 5.5 against the Green Bay Packers. I know that rooting for Caleb Williams, just that in itself, is painful. And I know that the Chicago Bears had maybe the most pitiful performance of all time last week. But they got rid of their offensive coordinator. Everyone is betting on the Packers. So you know what? I'm going to go against the public. I'm going to ride with the Bears here. There's a good chance I regret this later on, but you can go to FanDuel.com and back me with the Bears at plus 5.5. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we just got a few more questions left before you get on with your Friday and get started on your weekend. This first one comes from at D-Way Tula. Why not move Jaylen Sneed into more of an edge/Viper role? Very good question, considering that Sneed hasn't really been on the field as much lately, only played 19 snaps against Florida State. But when he's been out there, he's been really effective because they've been blitzing him a lot, and he's really, really good at that. The issue is his size. That's pretty much it. He's only 6'1", 222 pounds. And you got to remember, when he started at Notre Dame, he was under 200 pounds. Like, he was really light, but he's extremely fast, quick, has all these moves. So it's an intriguing option. But let's look at the other players at Viper. So Jordan Botelho, who was the start at the beginning of the year, he's 6'3", 250. Boubacar Traore, 6'4", 243. Junior Tuihalamaka is relatively undersized for the position. He's only 6'2", but he's also 246 pounds, and he has long arms to help make up for his lack of height. Josh Burnham, who's playing Viper now, moved over from strong side end to make up for all those injuries. He's 6'4", 251 pounds. Logan Thomas is 6'4", 224 pounds, but he's also a true freshman. He's still putting on weight. So when you compare that, he's at least like 2 to 3 inches smaller than what Notre Dame is looking for at that position and about 20 pounds lighter. And sure, like if Jaylen Sneed got into a big bulking program this offseason, I'm sure he could get up to like 230 pounds or maybe 235. But then at what point does it affect his explosiveness? Like when does he, start to put on too much weight and then he's not as effective getting off the edge and he's not as quick in the backfield? Like, I think that's the issue there. And I think Jaylen Sneed is in an unfortunate position that a lot of college football players find themselves. They are a tweener. And that's both, that can be referred to their position, where they're like one linebacker and another one, but a lot of it just has to do with their size and their ability. Like, I think Jaylen Sneed is a great athlete when he's out there, and he's really good at stunts and things coming off the edge. But I think if he was going to be an every down Viper, he is just too small to be going up against offensive tackles, especially good ones, play in and play out. So it's unfortunate because I don't think Jaylen Sneed is going to be around Notre Dame after this year. I hope I'm wrong, but his name has kind of been thrown around as a potential transfer, and I just think a big reason why is because Notre Dame has Drake Bowen, KVA, and they got Jaden Osbury. They're all really young linebackers. They've been playing more than Sneed lately, but I think Sneed is a really, really good player. He's just not quite big enough, and he doesn't have the consistency to be an every down linebacker over those guys I just mentioned. Like, I think Jaylen Sneed is still very good and very talented, but even though his best skill set is getting after the passer, I just don't think he can be an every down Viper because he's just not big enough. All right, next question. Drew Brennan, 77. Do you think the Jim Thorpe Award makes up for last year's brutal miss on Xavier Watts and he wins the award this year? Part 2, does playing in any of the playoff games count against the 4 games redshirt rule? I can answer that one pretty quickly. No. You can play in any amount of playoff games and that will not go towards your redshirt year. So something that Notre Dame might have to consider if they do end up making the playoffs. But as for Xavier Watts and the Thorpe Award, yes, they absolutely should. Because, look, if we're all being honest here, can we all say Xavier Watts probably should have just won the Thorpe Award last year for the best defensive back and not the Bronco Nagurski Award given out to the best defensive player in all of college football. Like, Xavier Watts had an awesome season last year, 7 interceptions, led the country and all that stuff, but like, he didn't really turn it on until about the halfway point. Like, that game against USC in the middle of October was really when he took off. But during the first half of the season, like, was anyone talking about Xavier Watts as the best defensive player in the country? No. Still super happy he won the award, and statistically, he did have a great year, and he made a huge impact on that defense. But I think that the more appropriate award would have just been the best defensive back, because I think he was the best defensive back last season. But these awards, and people vote on them, like, it's all so political. I don't really get it. A lot of the college football awards don't really make a ton of sense to me, but so far this season, Xavier Watts has had 35 total tackles, 6 pass breakups, 3 picks, and a forced fumble. So it's not quite as like eye-popping as the 7 interceptions was last year, but still, he's been an awesome player. He's been better this year in his all-around game than he was last year. But he's going to have some tough competition because you've got Caleb Downs, the safety at Ohio State, who's been awesome, Travis Hunter at Colorado, who might win the Heisman, Malachi Starks for Georgia. He's been really good. So Xavier Watts is going to be up there. I think he's going to be a finalist. He was just named a semifinalist not too long ago. But competition is going to be tough, man. And if he didn't win it last year, am I going to be very confident they're going to give it to him this year with less stats? I don't know. We'll see. All right, this last question comes from Vando Bando. Update on Howard Cross. When do you think he'll play meaningful snaps? And then we got another question about Howard Cross, and another one about Jason Onye, Michael Waterbury. What happened to Jason Onye? I'll answer that quickly. Can't really get into the details with him. It's not a medical issue. I can say that it's a personal issue. And with these kinds of things, you know, I don't want to comment on it. That is up to the player, but I don't expect him to be back this season. And at this point, I would be kind of surprised if he ever played football again for Notre Dame. I hope he does, because I think that he was really starting to improve his game, and I think Notre Dame needs so much help on the defensive line. Next year, he would absolutely have a big role in this team, but with a personal thing, you never know. So I'm not going to count on it happening, and if he does come back, I think he'd be very welcome by the team. I think Mark Freeman even said so in a press conference recently. So hoping for the best for Jason Onye. But for Howard Cross, I don't think he's going to play until USC. I don't think he's going to play meaningful snaps against USC. Like, do you really want him to go out there against Army, going up against an undersized offensive line that's probably going to try to get in some cut blocks, even though it's technically illegal? I don't think you really want him out there for that, because that could lead to more injury, although Notre Dame could absolutely use a guy like Howard Cross going up against the triple option. But if they can conserve him for the USC game, when they will need him, because I know USC is a bad record this season, but I've said it before, that game really scares me, because Notre Dame just does not perform that well whenever they play out here in Southern California, no matter how bad that USC team may be. Just think back to 2018. All Notre Dame had to do was win, and they were in the college football playoff. They were undefeated, and that USC team, who was like 5-7, gave them a real test. They were playing walk-ons on defense, and Notre Dame was still struggling to move the ball. So they really need him for that game. I'm hopeful that they were able to conserve him for that. And if he's able to play and he's like 80 to 90% in that game, that would be a huge boost to the Notre Dame defense, because they are going to have to shut down a Lincoln Riley-led offense. And even though they've had their struggles this year, that's not going to be easy. All right, that is going to do it for me today. I'm going to be back here Sunday afternoon. Did that last week. Really enjoyed doing that for my post-game reaction, recap, all that stuff. So be on the lookout for that. The best way to never miss an episode is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. Also, if you enjoyed the show today, please remember, give this video a like if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and of course, subscribe. And if you're going to the game tomorrow, enjoy it. Senior Day. I love Senior Day. Unfortunately, I will not be at the game, but I hope everyone who does go enjoys it. Safe travels, all that stuff. I will see you Sunday, and go Irish.